Hey, what's up users? This is John at Muse for You, here to help you build awesome websites without code. And in this video tutorial, I will be showing you how to use the new Particles.js widget found at museforyoushop.com. Now this is the first Particles.js widget for Adobe Muse, and it allows you to create interactive particles that interact on hover and on click. This widget is very customizable, and you can change the shape, the size, color, opacity, lines, line color, interactivity, and movement of the particles. You can even use images as particles. In this video tutorial, I will go over each option individually and show you just how powerful this widget is and what you can do with it. So I have an example here. I have some particles moving, and when I hover my mouse over it, we have this interactivity, and the mouse grabs all the particles, all the lines of the particles, and we have this interesting interactivity going on when we hover our mouse. Very good. And when I click, more particles get added on to the canvas here. Very good. So that's the interactivity, and this is just a small portion of what you can do with this widget, and it can really add a lot of visual interest for your visitors going to your website. So in this video tutorial, I will show you how to access this widget and how to use it. So let's begin. So to access this widget, you simply go to museforyoushop.com, and then you can click on the pop-up here. And then here you can get all widgets for $39 a year. You can get all widgets and all new widgets that I come out with for $39 a year. And you can click here to subscribe, or you can subscribe with PayPal by clicking here. Or you can purchase the widget individually by clicking on the widget here. So I have Particles.js widget. So I'll click here, and then here you can purchase individually by clicking add to cart, or you can get all widgets and any new widgets I come out with for $39 a year. And once you get the download, you'll get it in a zip file, and you simply unzip the zip file, and then you'll double click on a .mulib file that's in the zip file, and it will install into Adobe Muse. So I've already installed the widget, and to access the widget, you just go to your library panel. If you don't see your library panel, you can just go to Window and click on Library, and it'll bring up the library panel. So I'm going to create a new website. This is the website I just showed with the particles. So I'll create a new website. So I'll go to File, New Site, and I'll click OK, and I'll double click here. And very good, so I have a blank site. So the first thing I'm going to do is make the background black so we can see the particles, so it's very visible. So I'll make the background black, and I'll make the particles white. So for browser fill, I'll say black. Then I'll go to my library panel to get access to the widget, and I'll scroll down to Particles.js widget. I'll click on the drop down here, and then I have access to the widget. So I'll just click, hold, and drag and place the widget onto my Adobe Muse website. And right away we can see all the widget options. So I'll just close this for now, and I'll close my library panel. Very good. So here we have the widget, and at first it's fairly small. So this area is where the particles would interact, and you'd see all the particles. To make this area wider or larger, you simply click and drag to make it wider. And because this widget is proportional, when you make it wider, more height gets added as well. Okay, so there I have the widget, and that's a good size, so I'll leave it like so. And now we can preview how it looks initially. So I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and there I have my particles, and when I hover, right now we have the repulse interactivity, and on click we have the push, which pushes more particles onto the canvas. Okay, perfect. Now I'm going to go over each widget option one at a time just to show you how much you can do with this widget. So the first widget option is called instance number, or is instance number, and this just allows you to add multiple instances of the widget to your Adobe Muse website. So for instance, if I copied this widget and just pasted by hitting Command C and then Command V, I have two instances of the widget. So if I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, only one shows up, and that's because they both have the same instance number. To change that, we'd simply click on the second widget, click on the widget options, and change the instance number to 2. So now if I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, we have two instances of the Particles.js widget, and each one is customizable. You can customize each one individually. Okay, so I'll just delete this second one here. And then I'll go to my widget options again, and the second option is background color. So I'll change the background color to, let's say, orange. And at first you won't see it, and that's because this third option here says background transparent, and if it's checked off, the background will be transparent. So I'm going to uncheck, and now we have an orange background on the canvas there. So I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and very good. So we have an orange background with blue particles there. Perfect. So now the fourth widget option is number of particles. We can actually add more particles to the particles effect. So I'll say 120, and it adds more particles. And I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and we have more particles there. You could even go, I'll even go higher, let's say 200. You can go as high as you want. But just keep in mind that the more particles you have, the more rendering and processing power required to make the effect work. So we can see that with 200, it still works really well. Very good. If I were to go to, let's say, 500, the computer or the browser would have would need to use quite a bit of processing power. So I'll go to Preview Page in Browser, and it's still fairly smooth, actually. But yeah, you can work with it and just see how many particles you want for your effect. So I'll say 80 for now. The default starts with 80, so I'll leave it like that. And enable particle density is just kind of, if I uncheck this, the effect won't have as much realism to it. It won't be as realistic, or because when you hover your mouse over it, when it moves, it's using particle density, so it makes it look like it's actually moving through space. And if we uncheck it and I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, it doesn't really have any particle density, and the particles are just moving, kind of floating in there. And if I move my mouse, they're just kind of like really light, the particles. There's no density to it, so it doesn't feel as realistic as if it had density, because when it has density, it's a little bit thicker to move the particles around, and it gives it more of a realistic feeling when there's density added to it. So right now, if I move my mouse, they all just kind of move in sync, and there's not much real flow, I would say, to it. But maybe you'd like it like this. So there's that option. I'm gonna check density on again. So we have that kind of nice flow and that nice movement to the particles. Particle value area, I'm actually gonna show you what this does rather than try to explain it. So 800 is the default. If I set it lower than 800, there's not going to be as much value area, and the particles are going to be closer together, and it's going to look more webbed because everything is closer together. So if I say, let's say 200, the particles are going to be closer together because there's less value area. So I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and now we have the particles closer together. Okay, or I could go higher, and I could say 1200, and there'll be more value area, so the particles have more area to play in, and there's not as much particles close together. Okay, so that's the value area. It just adds more area between the particles and for the particles to move in. And so the smaller, the less space there is for the particles to move in, and the larger, the more space. So I'll set it back to 800, which is the default. Particle color is particle color, so if I change this to white, the particles will become white. For shape, you can add a circle, you can have an edge, triangle, polygon, and image. I'll leave it on circle, and I'll actually make the background transparent, so we're working with the white particles on the black background there. So for particle shape, I'm going to say circle. We've already seen circle, so I'll change this to edge. And with edge, the particles become squares. So I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and now we have squares for the particles. And now I'll change it to triangle, and the particles become triangles. Okay, so I have triangles there for the particles. Then I can choose polygon, and the particles become stars, and that's because there's 5 sides to the polygon. You can actually change the polygon sides and get different shapes. Very good. So you could even go up in number. So 6 gives you a triangle, 7 gives you kind of a circle with more edges on it, 8 gives you a square, 9 gives you more edges on the circle, and 10 gives you a pentagon, 11 a circle with more edges. So as you go up in number, you just get a circle with more edges added onto it. So yeah, you can play with that and see what shape you'd like for your particles. Very good. And then you can even select an image for the shape. So for this image, I'm going to click on Add File, and I'm going to select the cover art for the Particles.js widget. So I'll double click here, and if you have a square, then you don't really have to worry about the image width and height, because if it's a square, the width and the height will be the same. If it's not a square, then you just want to make sure that you put in the proportional width and height here. But because it is square, I'll just leave it at 100 by 100. And if I do select an image, I want to make sure that in particle shape, I select image. And there we have the Particle.js cover art, and I'm actually going to make the width and height a bit bigger, or actually I'm going to go to particle size here and make the particle size larger. So I'll say 25, and now we have the cover art as the particles. So I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and we have the Particles.js cover art for the particles. Okay, very good. So I'm going to change it back to circle. So we're going to work with the circle. And the circles are now bigger because we changed the particle size to 25 here. And so we've gone through the particle shape. So let's go through the stroke width. So for the stroke width, I'm going to say 3. And this adds a stroke of 3 to the particles. And then you can change the stroke color. So I'll change it, and I'll just say this green color here. Very good. And then we can leave polygon sides because we already went over that, and we went over image. So image width, this is for the image height, this is for the image as well. And then for particle opacity, if we didn't want an opacity on the particles, we could just change this to 1. You can choose between 0.1 and 1. So there we see the particles don't have an opacity. So I'll just say 0.5 because I do like it with an opacity. And here where it says enable random opacity and enable opacity animation, you can actually have the particles change opacity as the particles are moving. So if I enable random opacity and I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, the particles have different opacities. Very good. And it will go up to as high as 0.5. Okay, and I can enable opacity animation, and this will change the opacity in real time of the particles. And you can set the opacity speed and the minimum opacity you want the particles to change to. So if I change the speed to, let's say, 8, the opacity will change fairly quickly, and it'll look like the particles are blinking. So I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser. So we have kind of like a light show with the particles blinking in and out and changing opacity. So I can make that a little bit slower, the speed. And I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and now the opacity is changing slowly, and it's a really nice effect. Okay, so that's enable random opacity and enable opacity animation. So I'll just uncheck that, and you can set the opacity speed and the minimum opacity. So the next option here is enable opacity sync. So if I have enable random opacity checked off and enable opacity sync, and I'll check enable opacity animation, what happens here is that the particles blink in sync. Very good. So we can see we have particles that are changing together. Okay, so that's the opacity options there. And then the next option is particle size, which I already went over. So I'll actually change this to 15. I'll make the particles a little bit smaller, and I'm going to uncheck these opacity options here. Okay, and then we can enable random size. So the particles right now, they have different sizes. If we uncheck this, the particles will all have the same size. And if we enable particle size animation, the particles will change size in real time. So we can change the particle size speed, and we can set the minimum size. So if I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, we can see that the particles get bigger and smaller in real time. Very good. And we can set the minimum size. I think the max is 1, or actually no, we can set the minimum size to, let's say, 20. And I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and very good. So let me enable the animation again. Enable. So the minimum size was too large, so we didn't really see the effect happening. And there we can see more of the effect. And the speed is very fast. So I'll change the speed to 20. And I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser. And that's a bit better. Oh yeah, and we set the particle size to 15, so you don't want to set the minimum size higher than the particle size, because then the effect won't work. You want to have it lower than the particle size. Okay, so that's particle size, and you can enable size sync, and the particles will change size in sync. All right, very good. And the next option is enable line link. So if I uncheck this and I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, we don't have any lines with the particles. Okay, so I'll enable the line, and I'm going to uncheck the size animation there. Okay, and for the line, we can set a minimum size. If you set it lower than 150, the lines are really short and they kind of break apart easier because they're not there's not that much length to the particle link. If I set it higher than 150, let's say I say 250, and I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, we have more of a web effect because the lines are longer and they're more connected. Okay, so now I'll go to File, the widget options, and for the link color, I'm going to set it to white so it's easier to see. And for the link opacity, I'm going to set it to 1. It was at 0.4, so the lines weren't as visible, but you can set it to 1 and make them fully visible. And for the link width, you can set the width higher. So if I say 5, the lines will be thicker. So I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and there we go. Very nice. And I'll go back to the widget options, and then here we have Enable Move. If you have movement in the particles, this won't work as well. So I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser. What it does is it removes the particles, because the particles is looking for movement, and if you uncheck Enable Move, there won't be, it doesn't register. Now this does work if you have certain options here unchecked, or different options here. So I'm going to check Enable Move, and you can actually stop the particles by saying Move Speed, setting that to 0. So that's the best way to stop the particles from moving. So I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and now the particles are just at a standstill and they don't move. Okay, and then for move direction, so I'll set it back to 6 so we have some movement in the particles. For move direction, you can say top, top right, right, bottom, bottom left, left, top left. So I'm going to have the particles move right, and then I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and the particles are moving to the right. Okay, and then here we have Enable Move Random, so the particles will move randomly, and we can enable Move Straight. So let's see how this looks. So I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and perfect. So Move Random doesn't work if Move Straight is enabled. So here it almost looks like the particles are moving on an axis and they're just kind of rotating, which is a very nice effect. And I'm actually going to set the link width to 1 because I like it better when the lines are a bit thinner. There we go. So that's a really nice effect, and it looks like the particles are just rotating. All right. So I'll uncheck Enable Move Straight, and we'll leave Enable Move Random, so we'll have all the particles move randomly. And then for move mode, we can say out or we can say bounce. If we say bounce, the particles will bounce within this this area of the widget here that we have. So if I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, we can see the particles are bouncing within the widget area. And just to showcase that a little bit better, I'll give a border to the widget and I'll say white. And now I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and the particles are bouncing within the widget there. Very good, within the size of the widget. All right, if that's the best way, or within the container there of the widget. Okay, so I'm going to set it just to move out, or we'll leave it on bounce because bounce is kind of fun. And I'll uncheck enable move random, and we can have it move bounce so the particles will bounce off each other, or we can say move attract, or we can have them both checked and the particles will bounce off each other and they'll get attracted to each other. So if I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, the particles have a tendency to kind of get together and they bounce off each other there. Very good. So the next option is rotate X and rotate Y and detect on. Yep, and this is just to give more rotate space to the particles. So if I say 1200, the particles will move more on the X axis as well as the Y axis. Yeah, so that looks good there. And detect on canvas and window, you don't really have to worry about that. It is available if you know a bit more about code and you want to change it to on window instead of on canvas, but you won't really need to work with this. You can just leave it on canvas. And then here we have the interactivity of the particles. So we can enable interactivity on hover and enable interactivity on click. And for on hover, we can grab, we can bubble, we can have the particles turn to bubbles, and we can click on repulse. So if I click on grab and I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, it grabs the lines of the particles. Okay, very nice. And if I go to bubble and I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, if I hover my mouse, the particles become bubbles. Okay, so now I'll go to repulse, and this is the option we had it set initially. So I'll go to Preview Page in Browser. The particles just separate when we hover our mouse over it. And you can see because we have it attract, move attract, the particles kind of get together, which is very nice. I'm going to actually take this border off here. Okay. And then for interactivity on click, we can push. So if we go to File, Preview Page in Browser, we can add more particles to the canvas there. Okay. And we can push, remove, bubble, or repulse. So if I click on remove, go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and if I click, it just removes all the particles from the canvas. And if I click on bubble and I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and I click, the particles turn into bubbles, or they get bigger. They're kind of the bubble effect. Very good. And I can click on repulse and I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and when I click, the particles just get farther away from each other. Okay, so all this interactivity is customizable. So you can here you can enable resize. You do want to have this checked if you're working with the size options up here, the random size and enable particle size animation. So for now, I'll just leave this checked. Interactivity distance is how much distance you want between the particles when you have them interact, and you can have an interactivity opacity here as well. Bubble distance is how much distance you want between the bubbles when they interact. Bubble size, how big you want the bubbles to get. Bubble duration, how long you want the bubbles to last. Bubble opacity, how much opacity you want on the bubbles. Bubble speed, how quickly you want the bubbles to move around or to turn into bubbles. Repulse distance is how much distance you want when the particles repulse. Repulse duration, how long you want the repulse to last, or how quickly you want the particles to get back together. Particles push, how many particles you want to put back onto the particles effect when you click or when you hover, or when you click, because it's only available for click. Yep. And particles remove, how many particles you want to remove when you click. So if I set this higher, let's say to 10 and to 10, and I say particles remove, and yeah, I'll just leave that like that. And actually for the repulse, I'll set it to 100 the repulse distance, and the repulse duration I'll say 1. So I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and I'll click, and we have more particles being removed, and I'll just refresh. And then here we have the repulse. So we can see it takes longer for the particles to get back together after they repulse, and there's not as much distance in the repulse, which is actually a bit nicer. So we can set it to like 50. Okay, File, Preview Page in Browser, and very good. So there, like the particles just move a little bit, and let's set the duration back to 0.4. I'll go to File, Preview Page in Browser, and very good. Nice. So it's not as interesting having them not repulse as much, but they still repulse there. Very good. And let's say we set it to bubble, and we said push. So we're gonna add more particles to the canvas. So here the bubbles turn it, as you hover, it turns more into bubbles. And if I click, I'm adding more particles to the canvas. All right, very good. So I think that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I've gone over all the widget options. As you can see, there's a lot of widget options, and you can just really customize your Particles.js widget and effect for your Adobe Muse website. So that's pretty much it for this video tutorial. I'll just preview in the browser one more time. File, Preview Page in Browser. We have this really nice Particles.js widget, and again, this is just a small portion. As you can see with all the widget options, it's just a small portion of what you can do with this widget. So to access this widget, you just go to museforyoushop.com. You click on the pop-up here, and you can get all widgets and any new widgets I come out with for $39 a year. You can click here to subscribe, or you can subscribe with PayPal, or you can purchase the widget individually by clicking add to cart, or again, you can get all widgets and any new widgets I come out with for $39 a year. So that's it for this video tutorial, and I do this to help you build awesome websites without code. If you like this video tutorial, you can subscribe below. Also in the show more section are links to more resources to help you build your Adobe Muse website. And visit museforyoushop.com to get access to all these widgets. And again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video tutorial.